When we think of the Second World War, our minds go to the colossal clashes of armies. Stalingrad, Normandy, Midway. But beneath the surface of this conventional war, another conflict raged in secret. A shadow war fought not in open fields but in darkened alleys, dense forests, and the hidden corners of occupied cities. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're exploring the incredible story of the partisans and resistance fighters who sabotaged the Axis war machine from within. To understand why millions of ordinary people risked everything to fight back, you have to understand the sheer brutality of life under Axis occupation. This wasn't just a military conquest. It was a project of terror, plunder, and, in Eastern Europe, outright annihilation. The Nazi ideology divided Europe into a racial hierarchy. In the West, like France, the occupation was harsh, but the goal was exploitation and control. In the East, however, it was a different story. This was the designated Lebensraum, or living space, for Germany. The Slavic peoples of Poland, Yugoslavia, and the Soviet Union were considered Untermenschen, or subhumans. The Nazi blueprint for the region, called General Plan Ost, was a plan for the ethnic cleansing of over 50 million people to make way for German colonists. This ideology was enforced through pure terror. The cornerstone of German anti-partisan policy was collective punishment. An official decree in Serbia, for example, ordered that 100 civilians were to be executed for every German soldier killed, and 50 for everyone wounded. This wasn't a bluff. After an attack, German troops would round up innocent men, women, and children and carry out mass executions. Every act of resistance could mean the death of hundreds of your neighbors. On top of the terror, millions of people were abducted from their homes and sent to Germany as forced labor. This policy actually backfired. In France, when the compulsory labor service was introduced in 1943, thousands of young men fled to the countryside to join the rural resistance, known as the Maquis, rather than be deported. Faced with this oppression, flickers of defiance began to appear everywhere. And no two resistance movements were quite the same. Let's start in Yugoslavia, where the resistance was not just a war but a revolution. In April 1941, an enraged Hitler invaded Yugoslavia after a pro-British coup in Belgrade. The country was conquered and carved up in just 11 days. The Axis powers then expertly exploited the region's ethnic tensions, establishing a puppet state in Croatia run by the extremist fascist group, the Ustaše. The Ustaše began a genocidal campaign against Serbs, Jews, and Roma, murdering hundreds of thousands in death camps like Jasenovac. This horrific violence drove the Serbian population into armed resistance, and two major movements emerged, locked in a struggle for the nation's soul. The first were the Chetniks, led by Colonel Draza Mihailovic. They were Serbian nationalists, loyal to the exiled king in London. Initially, they were the darlings of the Western Allies. But terrified by German reprisals, Mihailovic adopted a cautious strategy of waiting for an Allied invasion. He came to see his main enemy not as the Germans but as the second resistance group, the Communists. The Communist partisans were led by the charismatic and ruthless Josip Broz, better known as Tito. Unlike the nationalist Chetniks, Tito's partisans promoted a message of brotherhood and unity for all Yugoslav peoples. Their strategy was the exact opposite of Mihailovic's constant, aggressive action against the occupiers, no matter the cost. The uneasy alliance between the two groups quickly shattered, erupting into a bitter civil war. Obsessed with destroying the communists, many Chetnik commanders began collaborating with the Italians and even the Germans to fight the partisans. This decision would prove fatal. The partisans' war was a saga of survival against a series of massive Axis encirclement operations. The most legendary of these was the Battle of the Neretva in early 1943. A huge Axis force, assisted by the Chetniks, trapped Tito's main force, which was burdened with over 4,000 wounded soldiers. Pinned against the Neretva River canyon, Tito made a brilliant and daring move. He ordered his engineers to publicly blow up the main bridge across the river. The German command intercepted this and, believing Tito was planning a desperate breakout to the north, redeployed their forces. It was a masterful deception. Under the cover of darkness, Tito's engineers built a temporary, improvised bridge right next to the ruined one. The entire partisan force, including every last one of their wounded, crossed the river and smashed through the surprised Chetnik lines on the other side. This incredible feat, known as the Battle for the Wounded, was a stunning moral and military victory. The resilience of the partisans convinced the Allies who the real fighting force was in Yugoslavia. The British sent a liaison officer, Brigadier Fitzroy Maclean, to parachute into Tito's headquarters. Maclean's reports to Winston Churchill were blunt and decisive. The partisans were the only ones seriously fighting the Germans. At the Tehran Conference in late 1943, the Big Three, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, agreed to shift all Allied support to Tito. With massive Allied aid, the partisans grew into an army of 800,000 soldiers that liberated most of Yugoslavia through its own efforts, a unique achievement that allowed Tito to establish a communist state independent of Moscow after the war. Now let's travel north, to Poland, a nation that faced an occupation of unparalleled savagery. Caught between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, Poland was partitioned in 1939. The Germans began a systematic campaign to destroy Polish culture and reduce the population to slave labor, while also making Poland the epicenter of the Holocaust. At the same time, the Soviets executed 22,000 Polish officers in the Katyn massacre and deported over 1 million Polish citizens to labor camps in Siberia. In the face of this dual effort to annihilate the nation itself, the Polish response was extraordinary. They created the Polish underground state, a complete, functioning clandestine government loyal to the government in exile in London. It had two main pillars. The civilian arm ran a vast network of secret high schools and universities, defying the German ban on education. It operated underground courts that sentenced traitors and Gestapo officers to death. And it established Zagota, the Council for Aid to Jews, the only state-sponsored organization in occupied Europe dedicated to saving Jewish people. Operatives like Irina Sendler smuggled some 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, placing them with Polish families and in convents. The military arm was the Home Army, or Armia Krajowa, known as the AK. With nearly 400,000 members, it was the largest resistance army in Europe. Its intelligence work for the Allies was legendary. AK agents provided the British with crucial components and codebooks for the Enigma machine. In a daring operation, they captured a malfunctioning German V-2 rocket, had its parts analyzed by secret scientists, and then flew the components from a makeshift airfield in occupied Poland to Italy. But perhaps the most heroic and horrifying story is that of Witold Pilecki. A Polish army officer, Pilecki volunteered to be arrested and sent to Auschwitz in 1940. His mission: to build an inmate resistance cell and smuggle out reports on the genocide happening inside. For nearly 3 years he endured the hell of Auschwitz, sending out detailed intelligence that became some of the first credible eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust to reach the West, before making a daring escape. The culmination of the Home Army struggle was the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. As the Soviet Red Army approached the city, the Home Army rose up, hoping to liberate their capital and greet the Soviets as hosts, not as subjects. For 63 days, some 40,000 lightly armed Polish fighters, many of them teenagers, fought the German army street by street, house by house. The tragedy was compounded by Soviet betrayal. The Red Army, which was just across the Vistula River, halted its offensive. Stalin refused to help the uprising, preferring to let the Germans eliminate the pro-Western Home Army, thus clearing the way for his own communist puppets to take control of Poland. Without support, the uprising was crushed. The Germans then systematically burned what was left of the city to the ground. 200,000 civilians were killed. It was a catastrophe, but it remains the defining symbol of Polish courage and the unquenchable desire for freedom. Finally, we turn to France, where the resistance was a complex mosaic of different groups. After France's shocking defeat in 1940, the country was divided. The Germans occupied the north, while the south was run by the collaborationist Vichy regime. From London, a little-known general named Charles de Gaulle made his famous appeal of June 18th, calling on the French to continue the fight. Inside France, The resistance began as a fractured collection of Gaullist patriots, communist militants, and regional Maquis groups. They were often suspicious of one another and competed for resources. De Gaulle knew that unifying these groups was essential if he was to be seen as the true leader of France. He entrusted this monumental task to one man, Jean Moulin. Parachuting into France in 1942, Moulin, a brilliant and patient diplomat, began the painstaking work of bringing the rival movements together. His greatest triumph came on May 27, 1943, when he gathered representatives from all the major resistance groups in a secret meeting in Paris. There, they formed the National Council of the Resistance, which formally recognized de Gaulle as the sole leader of the French struggle. Tragically, just weeks later, Moulin was betrayed, arrested, and tortured to death by the Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie. He revealed nothing and became the great martyr and symbol of the unified French resistance. By D-Day in June 1944, the newly unified French Forces of the Interior, or FFI, were ready. On the night of the invasion, resistance cells across France implemented pre-arranged sabotage plans. They blew up railway lines, cut communication cables, and ambushed German reinforcements rushing to Normandy. General Eisenhower later estimated their contribution was equivalent to 15 regular divisions. As the Allies swept across France, the Parisian resistance rose up and liberated their own city, just as General Leclerc's French 2nd Armored Division arrived. The image of de Gaulle marching triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées became a powerful symbol of a nation that had redeemed its honor. So what was the ultimate impact of this shadow war? Militarily, the resistance was a constant drain on the Axis. It tied down hundreds of thousands of troops, disrupted supply lines, and provided game-changing intelligence. Politically, it forged the post-war destinies of nations. In Yugoslavia, Tito's victory created an independent communist state. In France, de Gaulle's leadership ensured he would govern the new republic. And in Poland, the crushing of the Home Army guaranteed a Soviet takeover. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is moral. In a time of unimaginable horror and widespread collaboration, the partisans and resistance fighters stood as a testament to human courage. They proved that even in the face of overwhelming tyranny, the desire for freedom could never be completely extinguished. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments below. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening,